You are listening to Artificial Evidence, where the algorithm knows. I am Owen Carver, and today we are traveling back to the year 1971 to a small mining town tucked deep in the Appalachian Mountains. A place where everybody knew each other's name, where secrets whispered through the trees, and where, over the course of 5 years, 8 people vanished without a trace. The town of Black Hollow believed the disappearances were the work of drifters, of accidents in the old mines, of something, anything, other than the horrifying truth. Because in the end, the person responsible was not an outsider, he was one of their own. This is the story of the Butcher of Black Hollow. Black Hollow, West Virginia was the kind of town that barely made it onto a map. A few hundred people, a main street with a diner and a general store, and rows of coal-stained houses where generations of miners had lived and died. The work was hard, the days long, but life moved at its own slow rhythm. That was until the disappearances began. It started in December of 1966. Jacob Raines, a 19-year-old miner, was the first to go. He had finished a shift late one night and never made it home. The foreman figured he had run off, maybe to find work somewhere else. People moved on sometimes. That was just how life was. But then, in March of 1967, another man disappeared. This time, it was Frank Booker, a carpenter who had lived in Black Hollow his whole life. He left the tavern one evening, walked out into the cold, and was never seen again. 2 men gone in 3 months. People started whispering, and then the pattern emerged. Over the next 4 years, 6 more people vanished. A school teacher, a gas station attendant, a young mother, always at night, always alone. By 1971, the fear in Black Hollow had settled like coal dust, thick and inescapable. People locked their doors. Nobody walked alone after dark. But there was no evidence, no bodies, no signs of struggle. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Then, on the morning of October 12th, the town's darkest secret was finally unearthed. The Black Hollow coal mine had been shut down for years, abandoned when the tunnels became too unstable. But on that morning, 2 teenagers snuck in, looking for a thrill. They never made it past the entrance, because there, just inside the shaft, they found the first body. It was old, half mummified by the dry air, the flesh clinging to bone in places, the clothes still intact. By nightfall, the sheriff and his men had pulled out 7 more. The missing men and women of Black Hollow had been there all along, buried in the darkness. The town was in shock, and then came the real question. Who put them there? Investigators worked fast. The bodies told a gruesome story. Most had been stabbed, some strangled, others had their throats slit. But there was something else. Each victim had been mutilated. The cuts were precise, almost surgical. Whoever had done this had taken their time. Black Hollow was small. Too small for a stranger to kill 8 people and go unnoticed. The murderer had to be someone from town. And then, a name surfaced. Elias McGraw. A quiet man, kept to himself. Worked as a butcher at the general store. He had been in Black Hollow his whole life, inherited the shop from his father. At first glance, Elias seemed like any other man in town, but when the police searched his property, the truth came spilling out. In his cellar, they found a collection of hunting knives, each one polished and meticulously cared for. Some were stained with something dark, blood. In his backyard, buried beneath a pile of scrap metal, they found more remains. Not just the 8 victims from the mine, more. Elias McGraw had been killing for years, long before Jacob Raines had vanished, long before Black Hollow even realized something was wrong. But the worst discovery was inside his home, a journal. Pages and pages detailing every murder. The way he chose his victims, the way he watched them, the way he had convinced himself he was doing something necessary, something right. The townsfolk were horrified. Many had known Elias their whole lives. He had sold them meat. He had waved to them on the street, and all the while, he had been a monster hiding in plain sight. Elias McGraw was arrested on October 15, 1971. He never fought it, never tried to run. He simply sat in the sheriff's office and waited. At trial, he refused to speak. The jury took less than an hour to convict him. He was sentenced to death and executed in 1977. Black Hollow never recovered. The mine remained abandoned. The store where Elias had worked was left to rot. People moved away. And the ones who stayed, they never walked by that mine again. because the town may have buried its killer. But some wounds never heal. That is the story of the Butcher of Black Hollow, a man who turned a quiet town into his hunting ground and who, for years, went unnoticed in the very place he called home. Thank you for listening to Artificial Evidence. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. The algorithm knows.